and then I have to report to jury duty the next day.
Oh.
So I may be shot for a week. Yeah, I told them I could do it the week of the 29th. So they called me in on Thursday at the end of the week. Maybe they have a one-day trial.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you'll be dismissed.
Have you been called before, John?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I've only been called once before.
I get called every year.
I made it all the way up to sitting in the row of benches.
Uh-huh.
And then they don't.
Yeah, when I say I get called, I have to report. I've been on a couple of juries, not for a while.
Oh, I guess now, do you do that you just call in?
You can call in the night before and see if you still have to go. But,
yeah, in a way, I was kind of glad it was an 8-person murder. Or it was a gang shoot-up of a McDonald's in Milpitas, and where I live in Mountain View, we used to have both the Norteños and the Sureños, so I was kind of glad not to put a target, but I would have served. I was, because it's an interesting process. But for a week, I sat in a room and pre-laptops, I'm not even sure they'd let us in with laptops, got to read a book.
Yeah, that must have been a long trial. That would have been a long one.
Yeah, my sister's an attorney, so she told me my chances of getting through would be limited. You know, typically they don't choose family members who have attorneys.
8 people, so tragic. Oh my gosh. Oof.
It was a big deal. You know, and usually it's the innocent bystanders are the ones that end up getting killed.
Yeah.
But my mom has served on a death penalty trial. So interesting times for her. And she still to this day will not talk about it because they instruct you, don't talk about it. But,
I think it's okay when the trial's over.
I think so, but and he was a young guy, so I think he's still up in San Quentin.
Yeah, I was on a heroin for sale. It's hard to divorce yourself from the feelings, but do it. Well, it's
Chair
9:31. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe we're just waiting for Commissioner Sanborn. Everyone else is here.
Okay. Are we recording?
We are. Well, I'll press the record on this, but it is live. Yes.
Okay.
This conference will now be recorded.
We can. Yeah. So we'll start. We do have a quorum here, and so we'll get started with today's meeting. I think we have 4 policy proposals to begin to look at and see what we want to do as far as forwarding to the commission meeting. So we have a lot to go through, and then we also have a presentation later in the agenda. So the presentation is scheduled for a time specific, so we'll discuss the policy proposals up to or close to that time. But let's just start with a roll call so everybody can test their system. Manuel Medrano.
Here.
And Schneider.
Here.
Eric Potashnik. I see him.
All right, here. Sorry, I was on mute.
Very good. All right. Sarah Toyota.
Here.
And Heidi Sanborn.
Here.
All right. Looking at my agenda. Sorry. So we have the next item would be public comments for items not on the agenda. Or do we have any public comments?
There are no public comments for items not on the agenda or currently on the agenda.
Okay. So no public comments at this point. We do have meeting notes from March 8th. So the practice here has been to accept them unless people have changes. And if you have changes now, you can so indicate. So those notes will be open to the end of the meeting if you realize something is in error. Let's go to item 4. We are well ahead of schedule. So this is our discussion of policy topics, and we have 4 draft policies. So what I'd like to suggest is we take them in the order that they are listed on the agenda. So the first draft policy is around drywall. This was prepared with the assistance of a non-committee member, and then so we need to, I think, looking for a formatting question on how to address that. But it's committee members Toyota and Sanborn who are lead on it. So who wants to introduce this topic?
You want to take it, Heidi? You want me to?
Yeah. Sorry, I was getting it up.
This was in partnership with Amanda Kaminsky, who was really pretty instrumental in writing this. She did a lot of the background and so forth, and she did a lot of work in getting not just folks together who would either have drywall or would need to reuse it, and put the policy together, I think, with a lot of stakeholder input, which was really important to us. And kind of went back and forth a little bit about bans and how much drywall is actually able to be safely used in new product. And she put like I said, a lot of time into talking to stakeholders and getting input before we came up with this policy. And ultimately, we feel that it's pretty clear that when it comes to at least scrap from drywall, which is the first part of this policy, it's clean drywall scrap that on a construction site, you would basically cut out what you need, and then what is left over could be source separated. And a lot of this, she did actually talk to us as well and in her presentation. And so this is the first part of this proposal is the clean drywall, the scrap drywall that would be source separated. And then on the back end of that, there's a 10% minimum post-consumer use for drywall. And so that would hopefully drive that market and open up a market for the drywall, the gypsum, and reuse it, which currently is not happening at all. So we would require, basically it's, you're gonna have to we're gonna ban the clean drywall scrap from the landfill, and then do a minimum content post-consumer usability, and then basically it moves into the demolition. So the first part of it is the clean scrap, the next is the demolition. And so for the next I think 2026 and beyond, or then it requires a separation of the demolition, which is a lot harder, obviously, because that becomes it's not as clean as it's a little bit harder because it's not as clean as the scrap, but it's also something that tends to really contaminate a lot of the other C&D materials that could otherwise be recycled or reused. So pulling that out and separating that as early as possible is an important part of the overall C&D recycling. So we banned specific amounts up until 2025, and then after that, we decided that we really couldn't establish anything out farther than that as far as increasing it to say 15 or 25% out, to 20, 30, that it just went out too far. So we decided to leave that to Cal Recycle, put it in their hands to say, at this point, it's up to you whether you're going to be able to increase it, not increase it. We'll just have to wait and see because it's just too far out for us to try and put together a policy for that. And then it's kind of related because we wanted to add this also to the SABRAC policy. As we talked about in the last meeting, one of the issues with the SABRAC policy is that it doesn't give credit for something that gets recycled as a part of. It'll only give credit if you're using recycled material versus taking a material and then your use of it makes it recycled. So we would like to add that as a related policy to the SABRAC policy as well, so that if they're buying recycled content, gypsum, drywall through state agencies, actually they would get credit for that, but that would be added to it because it's not specifically laid out in SABRAC right now. So that's my 10-minute overview of the policy.
Okay. So the red lettering is actually I was marking up on Google Drive, so we're seeing some comments or questions I have. But Ann Schneider, you want?
Two questions. If you're a small company, a small construction company, or a do-it-yourselfer, how would they separate and get to market the scrap clean drywall? I'm just wondering if this is a program. So for example, I've done 4 or 5 rooms here with a bunch of end cuts and I bought everything from Lowe's. Would I take it back to Lowe's and they then have to make sure it gets back to the drywall manufacturer? So I just wonder if you want to go one more step and make the big suppliers, retail suppliers, have to take it back.
That's a good question. We didn't take that step at all, so I don't specifically know how it would. We didn't look into how it would work as far as the take back.
Well, I could speak to that, I think. So we would not, I would not recommend that because the bottom line is retailers are not set up to be waste facilities and to have people bring all kinds of dirty, dusty stuff back to their store. And the C&D facilities could have source separation, where people could drop this stuff off and keep it clean. But it also depends on the size of the job. It probably would be based on the job size of a certain size or up. And we do that with all kinds of stuff, our commercial recycling ordinances and all kinds of things, where you set a bottom so it's not getting the teeny tiny little guys if you've just got a tiny bit in your house and you're doing your own job versus big developers and construction sites that clearly could keep it clean and do volume. So, and retailers would fight that kind of proposal. To me, if it's totally necessary down the road, you can look at it again once you've proven that you can't get a certain amount through the existing channels, but I wouldn't start there. That would just be my recommendation.
I hear what you're saying. I just wonder, then we're really only going after commercial level jobs. So we're going after a mixed use development or a new apartment development, and we're not doing the heck of the remodeling that's happening out there. And I don't know what percentage of that is happening. I see a heck of a lot of remodeling in my area, and the monster home boom is not done. And that's a lot of stuff to capture. So I hear what you're saying, Heidi. Start with the easy stuff first before getting to the hard stuff. But it sickens me how much is getting wasted in these home remodels.
That's why I'm in this business, but we got to go with the big bang for the buck first and then see if we can get down to the little stuff. The other thing is once we start getting a market, hopefully it'll start having value and then the price will be free instead of costly to dispose. And that would be a great incentive for anyone to keep it clean and separate. So that would be the other part of it. So once we get the big circular part going, it really does help drive the rest.
Then I'm in the recommendation. I don't know if it fits in how we draft everything. I'm just thinking how legislators may not know what you've just said. And, you know, once it's pointed out to them, it's logical. The step is logical. Go for the big stuff first. My second question, and this might be for Commissioner Potashner, what happens when these clean drywall chunks end up in the yard waste container?
Oh, I'm not on mute. If the clean in the yard waste, are you asking if we turn it into gypsum at the compost facility? We do not.
No, it's just, I have heard over the years that some small quantities of clean gypsum added to yard waste going to a compost process can be handled. But then the question is, does it stay clean and not paint covered?
Yeah, we typically, I'm just thinking through our pre-processing lines, it's not going to make it through there.
Okay, so it's going to get landfilled.
Okay.
Thank you. I just think some public will end up moving it in that direction, especially because our garbage cans have gotten smaller and our yard waste bins have gotten bigger.
It's a concern for sure.
So let me call out my red lettering here. I think number 5 is a repeat of number 3. That's why you see it highlighted. I think it's the same sentence, just twice.
Thanks. Yeah, just take that out. Good catch.
Yeah. And then I have a question on number 3. So the idea would be require source separation. In 23, ban trim scrap in 25, but require 10% minimum content in 23. It seems like maybe that sequencing isn't right.
No, actually it's right, because we want to get the drywall manufacturers to create the market pull before we do any kind of banning of the scrap. We want to create that pull so that they have a place to put it.
Okay. So it's different than number 6 and 7. So, and then if you want to go up to the top, Kate, I had a couple of just observations. And I know the first one is the statement right on the first sentence that 75% of the 13 million tons that's generated is landfill, which it's generation versus landfilling, but that kind of suggests that there's 25% going somewhere, unless there's a huge growth in generation. And I wonder, maybe you could double check that one, because I don't think it's going to land application, and doesn't seem like it's going into the new drywall. So where's the 25% shrinkage?
I mean, just John, we do have gypsum additives to our compost feedstock, so we are bringing. I can see compost facilities as a user of recycled gypsum.
Yeah, and I understand that. It just seems like, I wonder if that's 75%, but I assume Amanda knows what she's writing about. It just maybe requires a little bit of explanation, just a sentence or two of where that goes now, and because we're focusing on building a new market. And then the red lettering on the second paragraph. I'm not sure how does that relate. So the demolition renovation is the second part of the recommendation, but there's a sentence here saying something about standardizing protocols to collect and recycle. Is that what's implied in the recommendation number, I guess, number 6 and 7 on the initial recommendation?
I think it was meant to be.
So it's addressed in the recommendation, right? it just, the way the sentence is written, it sounds like, you know, this will be dealt with later, but then it becomes part of the recommendation. So, again, it's just an editorial comment that maybe that phrase could be a little more precise.
Yeah. I agree.
I would make it more precise. Let's see.
The-
Given,
That it is addressed. And just take out in the near future, it's addressed through standardization, or would be addressed through standardization. It's part of the recommendation, right?
Yes.
How about if we say the source material needs to be addressed through standardization of protocols or new protocols?
be addressed via standardization of, protocols to collect,
So
Just say it, yeah.
needs to be addressed, yeah, and just take
That
out
makes
in
sense.
there. Okay. All right, that's all I had. Anybody else on this one? Mr. Medrano, sorry, you were in the chat. No, I'm sorry, I missed it.
So it's not on this portion, but I wanted to ask the question if the stakeholder feedback indicated if there is a certain percentage of demolition drywall waste that's also generated that could be accounted here. Kind of to the point of Commissioner Schneider, did they mention any of the possibility to that?
we did talk about that. The problem with demolition is it's dirty. It's been painted. It's, it's not clean drywall. Clean drywall is a lot easier to work with. It's known. There's no testing that's involved. But once it's in a demo project, it's much more challenging to figure out what we can do with it. So we were starting with this.
And my second question was also based on that feedback. So 10% of recycled content, that was what industry could handle to include?
It's a stretch goal, but yes.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
They've got some now that are already at 8. So to get to 10 by that date, they can do it. They've just got, this is, and that's why we didn't want to set like the numbers too far out, because technologies change, and just want to let CalRecycle handle that after the first goal is set.
Okay.
And Schneider.
Chair Sanborn, so in the draft that will go, that will hopefully go to the legislature, it's going to say, and in the future, CalRecycle can ratchet up the recycled content as most producers achieve it. It's actually written in there and they have the ability. What would be the process?
Well, this is where a good example of this, of what not to do, in my opinion, is the bottle bill, where it's so specific. Every time something changes, we have to go back to the legislature to fix it. And we're trying to avoid that in the future so that CalRecycle can move a lot more nimbly to address market shifts and changes. So if we set the initial deadline and recycled content based on the facts of today that are reasonable, so there is an immediate target. We don't have to go through 2 years of regulations at a minimum in order just to set the initial target. Then technologies change, all kinds of stuff can change, and then CalRecycle from those out years can decide how they're going to do it and what strategy they're going to use to make those determinations. But it's up to them. It's been delegated authority from the legislature. Otherwise, the legislature becomes the experts in everything that we do, drywall, batteries, everything. And I think that's why the legislature is just clogged with our bills, because they're not, the delegation hasn't happened to CalRecycle to have any authority to really do much, and they have to go beg for help every time they need to move.
And I appreciate that. In our final report, or in this report, have we talked about just what you said, how to move the power to make these changes to the staff or the agency that best knows how to do it? Is it really clear in everything we've written?
A really good point. I don't think we have made that clear. So that's an excellent suggestion, and I'll talk to Ted about doing a paragraph about that, because I don't think we have to date about the overall problem that they just have had their hands tied. Thanks for bringing that up.
And then my other question is, didn't Michael Gross from Zanker in San Jose talk about their process for demolition drywall? But they might be unique in the state. I know that they try to push a lot of the barriers there.
Right. He is pretty unique. And like I said, I think we're going for the low-hanging fruit first, the stuff that's easiest to address. And we should definitely look at incentives that would help deal with the demolition drywall as well. And we could, I think we say that's requires source separation. No, we say source separation of demolition and renovated drywall scrap starting in 2025. So we are basically saying they're going to have to figure this out in the next 4 years, how to source separate it and find homes for this stuff.
And hopefully they won't find what we found at Fort Ord was sadly some asbestos, not just in the drywall, but in the mastic, in the tape of it. So yeah, demolition is always more difficult. Anyway, good work. I'm happy to see this.
All right. So question is, do we want to forward this to the commission with some of the changes that were suggested here, or do we need to bring this back here before it goes forward to the commission? What you think? I guess I would ask the authors. Need to take it.
Sarah, I think if we take the input we just got and make a few corrections and tighten up just a smidge and just do one last run through with Amanda, I think it would be ready to go to the commission. Do you feel that we're there?
Yeah, I feel like it is. If you guys are ready to push it on, I mean, it'll get 2 readings at the commission. So,
right.
And this one, I think it's pretty straightforward, really, and the changes they're pretty minimum. So sure.
Okay. Any objection? Taking this to the commission? Okay. So 1 down. I think the next one would be the road base proposal, the next one in order.
Okay, so this is the full depth reclamation. We talked about this a little bit earlier. There was a presentation on taking the road down to the dirt and then rebuilding it on site and recycling all the materials there. And I think we've talked about it a couple times, just talking about it, but this is the actual proposal. It was sent in by Tom Teets and the folks that we heard the initial report or PowerPoint from. And basically what they're saying is that, you know, this is a great way to recycle some roads, but he's not going to legislate it, or it's not going to require legislation. They didn't want to make a proposal that asks for that because it's not useful in every situation. It's hard to decide how to write it so that you still have an idea of, or, you know, you still have options when it's not the best option for a specific road. So it's basically a way of, what it says is that although this is a growing technology that's used for recycling roads, it needs to grow a lot more. There's really not too much of a downside to this. It's less expensive off the bat, so it's not something that is higher but lasts longer like some of the other technologies we looked at. It's a really good possibility, even as far as financing right from the start when you're taking road down to the base. So what he did was he basically said that it could be an executive order or any other, we added any other non-legislative means, kind of just so it's open for however someone might want to move this forward so it can expand more rapidly. We can get this road base. We can save the greenhouse gases. We're not moving the road base anymore to recycling facilities. You know, it can all happen on the spot. So that's ultimately what this proposal is. And again, it's not a legislative proposal. It's a proposal to have an executive order or some other means to move this technology along quicker than it's happening right now.
All right. It's like Ann Snyder.
I'm wondering, okay, going backwards, at my National League of Cities, we lobbied on a number of federal funding bills, one of them being FAST, which is transportation-related funding and infrastructure dollars in the next wave on COVID recession recovery. And it turns out that small cities under 50,000 don't get the same financing that large cities get. My city would love to do this and would love to partner with another small city to buy the equipment or rent the equipment. But we don't get, basically, it's surface transportation block grants on that. So I don't know, Commissioner Toyota, if there's a way to write this to, and if we want little cities to get to do this, and many of us, our roads are woefully, and I always forget the scale that they use for road repair, but if we could encourage this, if we could make sure that this process qualifies for STBGs, surface transportation block grants, we could help kickstart this at many local governments instead of just the big guys having access to it. My city manager would love to bring this in right now. He's been following it for years, so they want to. It's really the financing. And for a lot of us, we're hopeful that the federal funding, both through the Transportation Infrastructure Act and other COVID recovery acts and climate change acts, will provide that funding. But I think we're going to be blocked on getting that funding. So I don't know, it's one of my new learning curves here. I did not know that little cities don't get CDBGs. It goes to the county and who knows what happens to it at that point, or it goes to the state and who knows. But if there was a funding mechanism to help cities 49,000 and under, even with partnership and joint projects or anything like that, we could stimulate this activity, because I thought this was really cool.
Okay, maybe in the proposal where it says executive order or other non-legislative means, we should add detailed funding options like you just talked about, like, or make it qualify for STBGs, small cities. We could put something like that in that area with that.
That would make me and all small cities very happy. I'm just diving into now the inequities of funding between big cities and small cities. I never knew about it before.
Okay, I can add that. That's a good one.
And it's right now critical because FAST is moving through the federal legislation. It's moving through Congress, and then it'll trickle on down to us, but I think it's going to trickle down quickly.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I have some editorial suggestions, a couple questions. On the title, right up at the top, it's more than a title. It's actually, I think the title is full depth reclamation, but there's a pretty lengthy description of the title that probably belongs further down. Are you seeing what I'm? Yeah.
I can just stop it at full depth reclamation and build in the rest of it to the background. How's that?
Yeah, and actually then and that's important because the background doesn't define full depth reclamation. And
okay.
So this comes close, but I think it really needs to be fairly explicit for someone reading this with no knowledge. They need to know what this is. And there's a couple of references throughout, or there are references throughout to landfill reduction. And I think that's our, since that's our focus, or our primary focus, I'd like to know more about that. Why would this result in landfill reduction? Particularly if it's, if this is part of the waste characterization. The big number in waste characterization, it's dirt and grit. That would be really helpful to know. And I don't know if there's any.
I think there is. When he sent this over, he sent a lot of the background and a lot of the things that LA is doing and how they're doing a whole study on how they're doing greenhouse gas, how this directly equates to greenhouse gas reductions and landfilling, and I'll pull that information out. I'm pretty sure I have it. I just don't think it's written in here as clearly as it could be.
Yeah, if we get a sense of what the potential reduction is on statewide disposal, if this were applied, that would be great.
All right, let me see.
And then lastly, there's a reference. It's on the line, says possible 2021 legislative policy,
Right.
and it refers to SB1. I'm not certain what that is. Which SB1? I think there's an SB1 every year.
Okay, yeah, I'll clarify that too. Okay, yeah.
All right. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Mr. Medrano.
I think with those amendments, this should move forward. I had a conversation with our city engineer this morning about this, and basically it makes economic sense. Here in Chula Vista, we run a cost-benefit analysis for every project, and usually FDR beats out any other type of road replacement. So yes, I suggest we move this forward soon.
So, Mr. Toyota and Sanborn, I think you had a meeting with Caltrans after ours.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. Thanks for mentioning it. I think, unfortunately, Commissioner Toyota couldn't make it that time. And so I had a quick half-hour conversation with the sustainability director of Caltrans and the person, Tom, who is at the top of their whole roads division. They would like to see this before it goes to the commission. So I would like to, now that we got feedback from you, to take it to them just to make sure they know that we're doing this. I told them we wouldn't surprise them. But they feel that this is already widely used and that there's lots of reasons to do it because that old road material has oil in it that has very, very high value. I think they said it was like $900 a ton or something, and they can basically get it for free by getting that oily substance back out of the old asphalt. So they said there's financial and time reasons to do this process. That doesn't mean everybody knows about it and does it, but the good news is there's other motivators to do it besides it's the right thing to do for waste issues. So they seem to think it's well utilized, but we hear it may not be in some communities. So I think I'd like to just take this back to Caltrans, Sarah, after we make any minor tweaks and then just get their final buy off and get this to the full commission. We could even send it over there today just to see if they have any feedback. Just let them know it's going to the commission on the 7th, and unless we hear feedback from them, it'll go as is.
Okay.
All right. Ann Schneider, you want to say?
Commissioner Sanborn, when you do that, could you ask them if this technique is used and it's in a noise area, will they still be able to use rubberized asphalt? I don't know if that fits on top or can be mixed in, because for all of us who are noise impacted, rubberized asphalt's really, really critical. So I'd love to get my cake and eat it too.
Well, they did tell us that there's a pilot going on to actually use the recycled asphalt in rubberized asphalt. So
Yay.
My understanding is that they are working on that.
Excellent. If we could clarify that, my personal mission is to make noise more of an environmental pollutant, and rubberized asphalt is one of the solutions. My city will be grateful.
Okay, so I think we're ready to move on. All right. The third of our four is the general plan guidelines. This one's pretty straightforward. The main thing, this is not a real extensive. So, Office of Planning and Research, Governor's Office of Planning and Research issues general plan guidelines, and they also do annual planning survey and provide some occasional guidance outside of the formal guidelines with technical advisory documents. The general plan guidelines, so the government code says they should be adopted and periodically revised. Well, the periodic revision in 2017 followed the previous revision in 2003. So there's 14 years between general plan guideline revisions. Now, you know, I've been there, I'm sure, and Snyder's heard this, you know, updating general plan guidelines is can be contentious because there are issues that have different impacts across the state. The 2017 update really expanded the focus on recycling, composting, and did quite a good inclusion of what was then current. But SB 1383 had just come along, right? So the 2017 update references SB 1383, but the regulation did not been adopted. So if you were to read the guidelines, and we included a section, you know, there's a really good discussion about the benefits of switching from landfilling to recycling and composting, and both sustainability benefits, employment benefits. So that part of it, greenhouse gas reduction, that part of it's a big improvement. But and it references model goals, policy, zoning, and development standards for composting and remanufacturing facilities that CalRecycle funded through the League of Cities CSAC Institute of Local Government. But then the regulations came along, okay, and the regulations in 1383 now require planning to address organic capacity and edible food. So the current provisions only relate to planning that was in place at the time, and so, you know, even 4 years later, that section's out of date. So what the proposal is to update, to include, to somehow notify local planning departments of these organics capacity and edible food recovery requirements, since those do have land use impacts. So this is all part of this language is all in the land use element of the general plan, which is great because it's a required element. It's the most focused on element. But somehow we need to find a way to make sure the planning departments are aware, particularly of the organics requirement, because there's a requirement to actually look at zoning, local zoning, and make modifications to provide capacity if it's needed for the community. So it's pretty extensive, and it's going to become a crush if the planning departments aren't aware in advance. And so the specific proposal, if you want to look at that, is CalRecycle worked with OPR to include organic capacity and edible food recovery planning requirements in annual planning survey and related follow-up, including technical advisories if warranted. And that OPR should consider updating the guidelines on a consistent basis to provide updated guidance. 14 years between updates is far too long. So again, you know, we know that's it's something OPR has to struggle with, but these advisories, I think they could issue that, and I think from our standpoint, it would be very helpful to give some heads up as to what's coming on the planning requirements under SB 1383. And then the last addition here is to include an inventory of resale and reuse facilities in land use element. We could talk about some language to go beyond that, but there's a reference to recycling. There's a reference to composting. There's really no real reference on resale and reuse facilities, and I know that's been a discussion we've had here. And, you know, we're kind of caught in that there's a subcommittee working on these things, but the general plan land use element guidance does not specifically reference resale and reuse or repair. I guess it should probably be included in that. So that is our our recommendation. I think when we started out, we thought we might get a little further into some of the GHG guidance on the CEQA guidelines, but kind of deferred to the organics committee for that one. So Ann Schneider.
I hate to say this, my thought just went out of my head. First question though, on the reuse and repair side, way back when we were first getting together, we had a speaker come and talk about how certain reuse businesses had to go through more permitting than other businesses, even when they're located in an industrial park. And I can't find my notes. I think this was probably last June or July. I don't know if anybody else remembers that, but if we could remove that barrier or language in it to find those barriers, because why should they have to go through extra hoops than say a glass recycler right next door or a metal recycler, which clearly are going to have more hazardous components. And I wish I could remember which of our speakers talked about that. And my second one, John, when I go and I talk to businesses here and I talk to our planning department, they have no clue with the old space allocation law, which to me would need to be updated for food reuse. Could you reference this, or am I the only one old enough to remember the space allocation laws for commercial recycling?
I'm not sure.
I'm old enough to remember.
So I'm not making it up, because it just amazes me when I look at the garbage enclosures or lack thereof. We haven't gone anywhere in 30 years.
Oh,
So
I
maybe
agree.
if we could reference the space allocation law in this proposal and make sure that our planning commissions know that, especially in this drive for mixed use for a lot of us in really heavily housing impacted areas.
Well, actually, I did a model of that for the city of Napa, where as a consultant, I actually redrew how they would do enclosures for the different types of sizes of facilities to make sure there was room for the food bins, the green food roller cart bins, for different sizes of restaurants, et cetera. And I think they're one of the very few local governments that did that. But that could be referenced as a model for other jurisdictions where we gave 3 different sizes and different configurations and all that stuff. But I don't think many have done it.
And it was a no-brainer, and it was in the early days that this passed. So I would love to see us bump up space allocation.
So,
And I'd
I'm
love to
hearing-
see that, Heidi. We have alleyways we're trying to recover, any of us who are land impacted, but basically alleys look like pigsties. And I love pigs, sorry. But, you know, we've got to do something there.
So I guess I'm hearing 2 things. I'm hearing what I thought was the collection, you know, the 3 carts, which is the organics collection and is part of 1383. But I'm also hearing edible food recovery, I think, from Commissioner Snyder.
Makes it a fourth activity.
Yeah, which is really more of a internal layout. But I think that's a really good suggestion to provide edible food. Ensure that there's sufficient space or capacity for edible food recovery at the generators. So,
well, it's just space. It's space allocation in general. And in fact, it's not the 5th container, because we tend to forget the grease trap, the fat oil grease containers.
yeah, I mean, edible food recovery is, you know, you're not putting it in a cart outside the building. It's got to stay.
Well, space allocation was for indoor and outdoor. It was both areas.
Right. Yeah. So.
And I can't remember the reference of where it was, but coming from commercial recycling, it was what I talked about a lot back in the day. And I know that our new planning director probably is not familiar with it at all.
Okay. I think we can address edible food, and we should include repair. I think Commissioner Toyota, you worked on this with me. Should include repair along with resale.
Got it.
And what else did we hear? Space.
Commissioner, Chair Davis, I'm looking at the line that says 14 years is so long. And yes, general plans take millions of dollars and so bloody much time. Should we be requesting what the housing element does and make it be updated more frequently? It's less painful that way, and it would respond to the market changes.
I think an earlier draft had a specific recommendation in it. My sense is this is not our bailiwick, right? And I don't know.
Well, then
I don't
let
know
me refresh.
specific recommendation. I don't know what it would be. I don't know what it would be, and are we really in a position to make a specific recommendation?
I'll go out on the limb here and say we should copy the housing element. If we're truly to get to zero waste and we're truly to reduce greenhouse gases, then I think it's important enough to update it every 3 years. And it's not as painful if you're only updating a little bit. Even if you look at housing elements right now with everything, one of my favorite senators, Scott Wiener, keeps doing, it's easier to stay on top than to wait 10 years to do it.
Okay, so it would only apply to the section, what's called solid and liquid waste disposal facilities. We might even suggest changing the title. But only that section, not the full guideline.
We'll just say the element that it's in.
Oh, it's in the land use element, but it's a part of the land use element. If we said the element, it would be the whole land use element, and I'm not sure we want to take that on. But what if we said update the solid and liquid disposal facilities portion of the land use element to reflect significant changes, like SB 1383.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so we'll rewrite that. Do we want to take this forward? Rewrite. Same set of considerations that you'll have a chance. We'll make some changes. And, I think it's as ready as the others were. So we're scheduled to have a presentation at 10:30. I did put in 10 minutes for a break now, but we don't need to break, and we'll have time, I think, after the presentation. Do we want to start the next policy proposal, or do you want to break? Start?
Yeah, let's start.
Okay. So the last one is, this is a significant one, right? So this is Eric Potashner and Sarah Toyota's take on manufacturing funding. Again, I highlighted some things on Google Drive, so you're seeing the red issues that I want to bring up. But who's going to introduce? So we have a public comment on this, Kate.
Would you like me to wait until the summary's been given, or should I read the public comment now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Let me refresh. This is from, I don't want to say anonymous, but a comment is the EPR proposed policy states the plan does not disrupt or otherwise adversely affect the sustained operation or commercial viability of solid waste collection programs, solid waste recycling facilities, or composting facilities providing services in accordance with local solid waste handling requirements. How does this work if the sole responsibility is on the EPR stewardship plan to get items recycled? Haulers can't have it both ways. Was this written by haulers? Also, how will thousands of companies join an EPR program? Who identifies them? How do you enforce against them, etc.? Sounds impossible for certain material types like carpet and, or in quotes, carpet and paint have much smaller number of companies compared to paper/plastic product industries. that's been published.
This is Heidi. Did I hear who said this comment? I don't think I did.
There is no name associated with the comment.
Are we allowed to take anonymous comments? We have no idea where this is coming from.
They can just write anonymous in the name box. So yes.
We can take it. I guess the question would be how much consideration you give to a comment that isn't attributed to anyone.
Yeah. When people don't back up their comments with who they are, I tend to not, I mean, I'm listening, but.
Well, gives Mr. Tashner and Ms. Toyota a chance to clarify if they want in the proposal, but you can introduce it.
Sure. Sarah, you want to take the lead or you want me to do it?
You know what, I talked about it last time. Why don't you go ahead and do it?
Okay, great. So again, this, to answer Anonymous's questions, the way this would work is the producers of and distributors of, let's just say packaging, we'll use that as an example, would form a one or multiple product stewardship responsibility pros, a producer responsibility organization. They would be managed just like they are now with Carpet, where CalRecycle would have to approve their plans. We do have a two-step approval process baked into this, where a stakeholder group of local governments, haulers, processors, and NGOs would also have to weigh in on that plan as well and approve it before it got to CalRecycle to make sure that there is representation across the value chain. The plan would address markets and be focused on infrastructure and markets. So basically, you would have rates and performance goals for each packaging type. So rates and dates or recycled content mandates that they would have to meet. And to get to those goals, they would then infuse the marketplace with either back-end infrastructure or bridge funding to fill the gap between what a recycler can make a bale for and what they can sell it for. And that's pretty simple concept here. This does not get into collection. It does not get into franchise. It does not get into getting in the middle of ratepayer investments that in the past have gotten California way ahead of the game compared to the rest of the state. So happy to go through it line by line or to just answer Commissioner questions on it.
Great. So I had a couple
Sure.
highlights right at the top there when we're going through it. There's a code section reference. I think that's government code.
No, it's Public Resources Code 40459.
Okay, so we want to
Yep.
clarify that. And then the sentence says,
Yeah, I think that's a mistake. I caught that too. Cost to process recyclable materials should be covered by markets.
good, yeah. Yeah, all right, we agree. And then the next paragraph, there's a lot of discussion of new markets, but it's also existing markets, right? So
I would say new and existing. That makes sense.
Yeah, okay. So we don't need to call out new specifically, because that and there's a lot of throughout that, like every sentence in there, and it references new markets. But so we just call them markets, probably clean enough. And then you started on the proposal. I think we probably want to spend time on that.
Sure. So this is what I was speaking to before, which is we're envisioning a sort of a two-step process when it comes to plan approval. You would, the pro would submit the plan that would include the funding and how they're going to get to their goals or the requirements. And before it went to CalRecycle for final approval and review, there would be a stakeholder group. And again, that would be a representative group of the value chain. I look at it as doesn't only have to include, but it should include local governments, haulers, processors, environmental groups. I would imagine ratepayers should be a part of that as well, residential and commercial. Have those representatives look at the plan first, vet it to make sure it makes sense, and then they push it forward to CalRecycle for final review and approval.
So would it be helpful to elaborate a little bit like you just did on the stakeholder
Thanks.
group? And
I think so.
and more importantly, where does that come from? Who appoints that? Does the PRO appoint that? Is that a CalRecycle?
You know, we hadn't thought of it. My guess is it should probably be CalRecycle.
Okay. So it's kind of a filter of the PRO to get to CalRecycle.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess just structurally, the way it's written, a stakeholder group, then CalRecycle, what you really want is approved by the stakeholder group, and then CalRecycle would, I suppose, they're going to review it and approve it. Just
They could, or they could find something. They could find something the stakeholder group didn't find objectionable and send it back.
Okay. Do we need to get how much detail and
You know,
I know I know committee member Sanborn has had experience. Mr. Medrano and I have had experience with carpet. You know, do we want to elaborate this a little bit, or is it okay the way it's written?
We need enough detail to make sure that it's going to hit the mark, but not so much that we're doing a research, project for CalRecycle. I mean, I think this level of detail is actually pretty good. It's giving a general outline.
Okay, but I think to clarify that our intent would be that the stakeholder group is appointed by CalRecycle.
sure.
And the stakeholder group, I guess, would make recommendations to CalRecycle, and CalRecycle would eventually approve.
I mean, devil's in the details. I think you would get more buy-in if the stakeholder groups were a gating mechanism, so that you couldn't get CalRecycle approval unless you got the stakeholder approval first.
Yes,
Okay.
I like that.
Right.
That's how we
So-
would have done better with carpet.
All right. Do you want to? So can we make that? Can we modify that, Eric? Can you
Sure.
rewrite around that? That'd be great. Okay, good. So we're at 10:30. Let's hold off if that's okay. Anne, you have a quick one. You're muted. Anne.
Ted and I were talking about the takeout food packaging. So I'm trying to draft that, and the question of reuse, plus for the labeling committee to define reuse. I don't have an answer for you, but when I'm looking at number 3, to make sure that reuse is not used as an excuse or a way to bypass what is truly recyclable or reusable. I'll try to think about this a little bit more, but just looking at single-use packaging and plastic single-use products, we were just talking about with the strain that restaurants are already in, how to implement something on the reuse side. And I don't have a magic wand on that,
Okay.
but just keep in mind reuse and how it can be abused.
Let's go to the presentation, and then let's come back on numbered sections and have a little dive into that language before we move in.
Chair Davis, I apologize. I thought our meetings were 9 to 11. I scheduled a physical therapy appointment, so I'm leaving at 9:45 or 9:45. So thank you. And sorry.
Mr. Medrano, your presentation is up, I think.
So I think staff might be putting it up in a minute.
Go
go
ahead. Sorry.
So I'd like to thank the folks from NRDC, Jennifer Skeen and Shelley Vineyard. Their help with this, with developing this proposal and preparing this presentation has been great. This comes at a great time when there is an additional piece of legislation already had been proposed for state purchases. But then, as we see in our recent waste characterization study, paper continues to be the second most disposed of product. So when we talk about how much material if we're gonna target material, I think paper, fiber derived products, it's critical for us to look at. So I'll let the folks from NRDC kick it off, and at a later point we'll look at the proposal, which I hope we can get your support.
Thank you so much, Manuel, and thank you all for having us here today. My name is Jennifer Skeen, and I'm the Natural Climate Solutions Policy Manager with NRDC's Canada Project, and I'm joined by Shelley Vineyard, my colleague who's the Boreal Corporate Campaign Manager, and she'll be on and available to also answer any questions or mention anything I might have missed. And we also have another colleague, Zach Smith, who's been working with us on this, but wasn't able to make it today. I'll go ahead and, can you all see my PowerPoint?
Yes, it would be great if we could have the presentation. There we go.
Yes. Okay, great. Perfect. So what we want to talk to you today about is toilet paper, something that seems very ubiquitous and banal, but is really having a very monumental impact on our forests, including the Canadian boreal forest, which is what I'll focus on in particular today. Not many people realize, but the overwhelming majority of toilet paper we find on store shelves comes from trees, and not just any trees, but forests that are often old growth, centuries-old ecosystems that are home to Indigenous peoples, at-risk wildlife, and are absolutely critical to the global climate. These forests are then clear-cut, turned into pulp, packaged by companies like Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark, and then sent to markets where they're then flushed down the toilet. And this is a graphic that was included in our most recent issue with Tissue Report that shows what we call this tree to toilet pipeline, whereby industry is sending these forests to a very ignoble fate in our bathrooms. And as we'll talk about later, and as NRDC's latest issue with Tissue Report illuminates, all of the largest brands seen in the DNF categories continue to rely entirely on virgin forest fiber, so this fiber from these forests, to make their toilet paper. So this includes brands like Charmin, Angel Soft, Quilted Northern, are all made using this dangerous, wasteful process. There are a number of brands that you'll see in the A and B categories that have embraced solutions, and we'll talk about those later, that don't rely on this and have embraced recycled content as well as sustainable alternative fibers. But they're still very much in the minority, and the dominant companies are in those right-hand columns. And just to take a step back, I want to position this conversation in the context of the global crises that we're facing. It's a time when every tool in our toolkit needs to be leveraged to be protecting our climate and our natural world and the people who live in it. As the IPCC has stated, we now have about 10 years left to avoid exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, so avoiding those catastrophic climate impacts. The International Policy Biodiversity Ecosystem Platform has mentioned that 75% of land on Earth has been degraded, and a lot of this degradation has been happening in our forests. And this also happens in the context in which forests are absolutely key to our climate and biodiversity. So forests harbor 80% of all biodiversity, terrestrial biodiversity on Earth, and they are really the lungs of our Earth. So for millions of years, they've been regulating our climate, absorbing carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen, and also storing it, as we'll talk about with the boreal, in its soil and vegetation. So really key players and critical climate allies. And one forest that's very often forgotten about in this conversation is the boreal forest, especially the North American boreal forest, which spans across Canada and even into Alaska, and is this really paradigmatic wintertime landscape. So if you think of a kind of a winter scene with caribou, which are also known as reindeer, very slow growing season, evergreen trees, that lies across Canada. And it's absolutely critical to the global climate. It crowns the Earth's northern hemisphere, stretching across over 1 billion acres, and accounts for 1/4 of the world's remaining intact forests. And here's just a quick picture of it so you can get a sense of what it looks like. And this forest is home to over 600 indigenous communities who have lived on and relied on the forest for millennia and continue to do so, and have been stewarding the land. Their cultures are inextricably intertwined with this forest. It's also home to very iconic and at-risk wildlife. So species like the marten, the boreal caribou, which you see in the lower left, the Canada lynx, and also billions of migratory songbirds that we see across the United States every year. Each spring they fly up to the boreal, 3 billion of them, so we might be seeing them in our backyards now. They fly up there to nest and have their young, and then they and 2 billion additional birds, so 500 birds, then fly south again for the winter. So the boreal is this nesting ground for species that we see across North America. And as I alluded to earlier, it's also an essential carbon storehouse. It's the most carbon dense forest biome on the planet other than mangroves. And a lot of this carbon, it stores more than 12% of the world's land-based carbon, which is twice the amount of the carbon that is in the world's oil reserves. So this carbon is locked up in the boreal soils, especially also in its vegetation, and plays a really critical role in global carbon cycling. But this forest is critically at risk. Each year, the logging industry clear cuts over 1 million acres of boreal forest. This is equivalent to 7 NHL hockey rink size areas every minute. And Canada has the 3rd highest intact forest loss, behind only Russia and Brazil. And 90% of what's happening up there, the logging, is through this clear cutting process, whereby the trees are completely removed from an area, leaving landscapes like you see here. And Canada is also ranked last among G7 countries in percentage of land protected. So it's not nearly doing enough to ensure that these critical landscapes are being safeguarded for the future. And you can see here just a map of where this anthropogenic disturbance has happened over the last decades, and the scale of the problem and what is still at risk. This logging disproportionately impacts indigenous peoples whose traditional territories tend to overlap with some of the places that are on the chopping block, and indigenous peoples have a right to consent or right to consultation in Canada, but don't have the right to free, prior, and informed consent. So the systems that are set up in Canada are often happening without the approval of indigenous peoples, which is undermining their ways of life and their self-determination and sovereignty. For example, in the territory you can see on the right there, that's in Waswanipi, and in that community, over 90% of their trap lines or their hunting areas have been impacted by logging. So there's just 10% remaining. Logging is also having a significant climate impact. In removing the boreal's trees, it eliminates the forest's capability to continue absorbing more carbon from the atmosphere, but it also then turns the forest against us, flooding the atmosphere with carbon that had previously been locked up in the boreal ecosystem. And, disrupting the soil, which had been locking away this significant amount of carbon. This is also having a dramatic toll on species, particularly the boreal caribou, which rely on intact forests. And you can see here just a chart of some ranges in Ontario and how degraded they've become. And only 15 of Canada's 51 boreal caribou herds currently have enough habitat left to survive long term. And as you can see here, these impacts to the forest are incredibly visible as well. Up top, you have intact forests, and below you have what comes after. And the logging industry often points to the fact that, oh, trees regrow. This is a renewable, sustainable operation. But as you can see on the left, a lot of areas are not growing back even decades later. This screen grab is from 20 to 30 years after a clear cut, and you can see how much area just has completely failed to regain any of its tree cover. And industry is also not replanting with an eye toward sustainability. They're replanting with an eye toward further profits. So replanting tree species that will grow quickly and make logging easier in the future. So forests are very much not coming back the same And of course, the climate value of the forest would not be regained in a human lifetime. So very far beyond that 10-year time frame we have to address the climate crisis. So as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. marketplace plays a really substantial role in driving this. The U.S. accounts for 80% of forest product exports from boreal provinces like Ontario and Quebec, and for nearly 40% of the industry's total revenue from boreal provinces. And of course, a major driver of this is the marketplace for toilet paper. A lot of what's coming out of Canada and into the U.S. is northern bleached softwood kraft pulp, which is pulp that is favored by companies like Procter & Gamble and Kimberly-Clark to make their products like Charmin, Angel Soft, and Quilted Northern. Fortunately, solutions to the treated toilet pipeline do exist in the form of toilet paper, paper towels, tissue made from recycled material and alternative fibers. So we have brands like Who Gives a Crap, Seventh Generation. A really growing number of companies are recognizing the imperative of transitioning away from these hackneyed and outdated and unsustainable ways of making toilet paper and embracing much more lasting, just, sustainable solutions. The bottom right is a brand that Target actually introduced, I think, last year. That's 100% recycled bath tissue Everspring. So there's a growing marketplace for this. And there's also growing and overwhelming consumer demand for these more sustainable products. You know, when Shelley and I first started this campaign, we certainly didn't realize the impact that our toilet paper purchases were having on the boreal and other forests. And what we found is that when people do learn what's happening, they're appalled and they want to transition to something that is not coming at such a dire cost. So these are just two questions we put out in a poll. I believe last year or the year before, asking people, would you want to see more sustainable products? And if you knew that this was happening, would that be concerning to you? And you can see that overwhelmingly people said yes. Throughout the campaign that NRDC has been running with Stand.Earth and other organizations, we've seen really a groundswell of interest and demand for people calling for these companies to transition to more sustainable solutions. And increasingly, we're seeing the financial sector getting involved as well. Last fall, in a very unprecedented vote, 67% of Procter & Gamble shareholders actually voted in favor of a resolution that called on the company to report on what it's doing to address both deforestation and intact forest degradation. This included investors like State Street and BlackRock, who obviously are tremendous asset holders and have significant marketplace sway. So this really signaled a sea change in how the marketplace and the financial sector are viewing this issue, and it's becoming an issue that they increasingly want to see companies addressing and are willing to pull their own financial assets from companies that are not making that shift. So this leads us to how California can lead. Obviously, California is the 5th largest economy globally. It has 12% of the U.S. population, meaning it has this very significant marketplace for tissue products like toilet paper and facial tissue. California imports of Canadian pulp are valued at 58 million Canadian. And so California itself, from its direct imports, is a significant driver. So what we're going to talk about in the discussion and what Manuel is putting forward is a policy to put a price on virgin pulp in tissue and paper products, because right now this price is not being captured in the products that are being sold on shelves. Instead, it's being externalized to communities, indigenous communities, to Californians who are facing increased climate impacts, and to future generations. And I also want to position this in the context of a bill that was introduced last month by Assemblymember Kalra, AB 416, which would address California's procurement of products from tropical and boreal forests and would position the state to end all sourcing from deforested areas and intact forest degradation. So this is a very timely moment for California to be taking leadership on this, given that momentum. New York is looking at a very similar bill to AB 416. And of course, we have this groundswell of momentum from consumers and from the financial sector as well. So I'll leave it there. I know I just ran through a lot in a very short period of time, but I'll open it up to questions and discussions and really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jennifer. Manuel, do you want to talk about where we're going with this?
So we're developing the policy proposal as we speak. We have a couple of more pieces of information that we'd like to add, but one pretty, I guess, provocative thing we'd like to add, at least on my end, though, is why stop at toilet paper? Why not require higher recycled content of all paper products that are being offered in California, that are being sold in California, and help drive that market for recycled content pulp that could perhaps help industry here in California, or at least in domestically. So I like to kind of throw that out as an additional discussion point on this that could definitely help us just grab additional direction on that policy proposal.
Jennifer, any reaction, or Shelley?
Yeah, we would absolutely be in support of expanding this beyond the tissue sector. The tissue sector is just sort of one illustrative area that we focused on to illustrate the wasteful practices that are happening in the boreal and how the U.S. is driving it, but it doesn't stop there. It certainly extends to newsprint and other paper products, so would absolutely be in support of that. I think similar incentives that it would drive around increasing recycling capacity would translate across and make for a really good synergy between both tissue and broader paper action on this. And one thing I will say is the pricing mechanisms that we would potentially be looking at would serve as a form of increasing investment in the recycling sector. So that money would go back into growing California's recycling industry itself.
So I think California has minimum content for newswire, or whatever's left of the newsprint market, and certainly cardboard OCC I think is pretty high post-consumer content. But maybe it's the other grades that you're talking about that. So I'm not sure where the focus is, Noel, but it's worth considering. If you set the bar too low, it doesn't apply to something like OCC or newsprint. So whether we pick fiber type to focus on, I don't know, tissue has other uses than the toilet paper.
And I think those already have markets. Those type of products already have markets with that benefited from this recycled content. But we're talking about there's a lot more other paper products out there, packaging. We're still receiving a lot of junk mail information from on our homes. So we're not going to go paperless anytime soon. I know technology is working and moving, but there's still a lot of other products that we could be asking or kind of developing here to help this market. Really interested to hear what Commissioner Potashner as a company, what his company or his thoughts on this are.
Yeah, and I guess I'd be curious if NRDC did any research into labeling and what that would do to drive consumer behavior on this issue, whether it's a no recycled content label or a recycled content label.
That is another direction we looked at when we were initially drawing up this policy. So for context, actually even before Manuel had approached us about this, we worked with some Yale students on developing what a bill like this for California would look like. Ultimately, we decided that the pricing regime would have sort of a lot more impact and be a lot potentially cleaner, but I think the labeling is also an avenue to go down, maybe even in tandem with this, because a lot of what's happening is you're seeing companies releasing brands that are described as sustainable. There's a lot of greenwashing happening, and it's really hiding from consumers the impact of their purchases, and having some label requirement that actually illustrates for purchasers what is and is not forest friendly. I think we were arriving at something like a forest friendly label is definitely an avenue to consider. Shelley, I don't know if you have thoughts on that piece.
No, I think you answered that pretty well. I think, what we found in terms of like when we started releasing our research to the public, it was, far and away the most popular scorecard and social media content that NRDC released in its first year. And I think that's indicative of, just how undereducated the general public is about how tissue products are made, where they come from.
So, Sarah Toyota.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in on the labeling as well. I think as we do consider something like that, I think forest friendly is a better label than minimum content, because a lot of times if I see something that has 10% minimum content, I feel like, oh, that's great. But in this case, it's really not. It's still 90% of this forest, right? So that, to me, that would be, if they even replace 10%, I'd be like, oh, this is great, but it's not. So I would rather have like a more forest friendly kind of labeling rather than a minimum content.
Heidi, and more.
Yeah, thank you. This is something I've been talking about for over 20 years, and those forests need protection quickly, so I'm very glad you brought this to us. Yeah, I'm a big fan of focus groups and making sure that the messaging is going to work. So my suggestion would be somehow finding the $15,000 or whatever, do some focus groups to find out what label would be the most impactful at actually getting people to change their purchasing behavior, because we could cause hundreds of thousands of dollars of labeling changes and not really see the impact if we had just done a little tweak based on a feedback from some focus groups or something. I totally love this direction, but I tend to agree with Sarah that I think recycled content to wonks in our industry means something to people. They just think about forests and protecting the forest. They don't tie all this together because that's not the world they live in. So it might be both. It might be a recycled content label post-consumer with an extra forest friendly, so that we know both. We know exactly how high the percentage is of post-consumer content, and we also know, and I have already changed to Who Gives a Crap, and I love those products. So thanks for highlighting that, because I give a crap.
So I noticed on the scorecard from A to F, there seemed to be a grouping on the F side of soft, right? And soft being the word. First of all, is there a definition, or is there some standard, or is that a marketing term that anybody can apply?
I can take this question. And it also ties back to the question of what is in a labeling requirement too, because there's a lot of both sustainably soft or soft marketing, and there's also a lot of, eco-friendly greenwashing, and those don't have any sort of definition tied to them, but they're just language that is placed on the front of a tissue package that doesn't necessarily indicate anything about how that product's made. And I think particularly in the last couple of years, there have been so many different products that have been launched that are made using recycled content, but are plenty soft or plenty strong, that people are very happy with, that have really refuted this notion that sustainable sourcing or forest-friendly sourcing and softness or strength of your tissue products are mutually exclusive. And the fact that the companies that are creating these new products are small startups, I think is particularly telling, that the companies at the far end of that scorecard getting Fs have multi-billion-dollar advertising and R&D budgets with which to, really invest in innovation.
So let me follow up before I call on Heidi. Do those companies also own plantation forests, or do they have a stake in the harvesting that you're talking about, or are they integrated across? And then the second part is what kind of subsidies? Maybe it's Canadian subsidies, but what sorts of public subsidies underwrite that activity?
Yeah, I'm most familiar with the boreal context, so I don't know what kind of consolidation has happened in more southern and tropical forests. But certainly there are very close ties between certain Canadian logging companies and some of the companies that you see in the F column of the scorecard. They've been sort of longtime purchasers, but they are separate entities. So there is a divide there. And, one thing that we're pushing for is calling for companies like Procter & Gamble to start setting up these standards so that they can then push these companies to embrace better practices and reduce their footprint on Indigenous peoples, caribou, and the climate. In terms of subsidies, I mean, that's a very long and fraught conversation related to the softwood lumber agreement between the U.S. and Canada and tariffs there. But I mean, certainly or 90% of the logging that happens in Canada happens on public forests that are then leased out to logging companies for certain stumpage fees. And there have been also claims of sort of misreporting in terms of how much wood is actually being procured, and that's sort of benefiting industry. We just saw an expose around that in Quebec. So certainly there is a lot on the policy side in Canada that can be done. They've just been very intransigent on doing so. And what we found is that pressure from the U.S. marketplace and U.S. policymakers is really able to move the needle on this in a way that we haven't been able to working directly with Canadian policymakers.
Yeah, and I guess my question about the subsidies, we see on other recycled commodities that the recycled commodity price is often driven by virgin pricing, and that there needs to be a spread to induce manufacturers so we're affected by, for example, plastic, by the price of oil. OPEC production drives recycled plastic prices. So just something to consider. Heidi Sanborn and then Sarah Toyota.
Thank you. A couple things I forgot to mention that seem to tie into this, because there's right now, this could be the opportunity at the federal level to get some big stuff done as well. And I'm talking with Congress people about different bills and recycling and so forth at the federal level, and the new EPA appointment, et cetera. And I'm wondering if this is the time to maybe tackle the bigger issues of national policy around this on recycled content and labeling. And the reason I say that is we're also, co-sponsors of AB 818 on getting flushable wipes that are not flushable, that have plastics in them, to not be labeled that way. And we're working with Procter & Gamble and Kimberly-Clark and all the exact same companies you're talking about. And we did come to an agreement with them about this, and we're going to pass it in California. I hope to pass it nationally. But we've also got a bill this year on SB 343, which was based out of a recommendation from this commission about getting rid of chasing arrows on non-recyclable products. So this labeling issue and what the commission has seen is a really important signal to the public to help us by purchasing the right thing. They can't help us if we aren't telling them the truth on the label and they're uninformed. And that's exactly what's happening with this, what you're talking about. So this to me flows directly into what we've been talking about. The other issue is I would love to get the details about the subsidies of the forest harvesting, because and how it's done from the Canadian side and even on our side in the U.S., because that's one of the things that policies that is coming from Commissioner Sky, Kobe Sky from LA County is working on that right now. And we'd love to have some specific examples because it makes it really hard to recycle and develop markets for materials when the subsidies are so outlandish. We can't compete in the price market because of the subsidy on the virgin stuff. And that's been a massive problem with our industry, is the subsidization of virgin extraction. So details on that would be helpful to us. But I guess in the bigger picture, I think we've got some big labeling stuff we have to talk about. And I'd love to talk to you offline about this as well and seeing if there's other things we can do. But I am completely supportive of getting something in the commission report for this next cycle on July 1st on this issue. I think it's very, very important. It gets to the root of a lot of our problems with recycled paper, and that we've lost a lot of our mills in the country because of this cheap subsidized lumber that we're getting virgin for things like toilet paper. Thank you.
Sarah?
Yeah, I just want to go on with the labeling thing because really I think it's a matter of people knowing. And so I'd like to consider bringing forward a proposal that's not so much labeling, but a proposal that is around if you sell something in California, consumers should be able to find out how it's being made or the information that you're kind of bringing forward with this specific issue, but on a broader level. Not instead of labeling, but as even, just something to go along with labeling. So labeling can be one policy and maybe a policy on just consumer, just some kind of information from the manufacturers or who are selling here, where they're getting their material or something like that. I mean, it would take a little bit of thought, obviously, but I'd like to see a policy like that. And I'm more than happy to work on it. And maybe if you guys talk with you again online, offline, if you're interested in that as well, to come up with something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that would work. It would really go hand in hand with any labeling regime because we would want to make sure that it is, airtight and actually based on reliable supply chain information. But this also goes really well with AB 416, which looks at California's own procurement of these products and would have to set up some sort of system for tracking those. So would love to have that conversation.
So there's a bill in the legislature now in California that is going to do this? Oh,
yes. I can link to it in the chat. Let me find it. Yes, it's AB 416. It was introduced early February by Assemblymember Collier. That's focused on California procurement.
Sorry. I was going to ask if do we have a copy of your presentation that we put on Drive?
Yeah, we'd love to have that put on the Google Drive so everybody can see it. So if you could email us your presentation, and then that Calderon bill, that's interesting. I didn't know that was in, and that, so that's something maybe the commission could take a policy position on if it's already there.
Yeah, but that bill addresses state procurement only. And I don't think it has a recycled content requirement on it.
Oh, so we could do a policy that supports the bill and goes beyond.
Mm-hmm.
What, Jennifer, I'm curious whether, or Shelley, whether the EU has done anything around labeling. I know I track repair issues, and they've been doing quite a bit of work on that, and it becomes very comprehensive. I mean, it's not just one factor, right? They end up with a composite scoring that's kind of self-certified, but because we're talking about recycled content on one hand and virgin materials on the other hand, there's probably, production concerns. There's a whole series of things that go into that. And if it's just a single label, then, where do you set the bar? And so just something to think about. But do you know, has the EU taken up this issue?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be curious. It sounds, it's complex. And, like I said, if you have a single standard for an entire industry, something like cardboard with a high recycled content, they're going to be in one place where tissues at a whole different place. How do you move between material types? I think on the commission labeling committee, it's been clear to me that there's a real difference between, what's the label? Is the label the packaging? Is the label the product? Is it the packaging and the product? Do you end up stacking labels? What kind of confusion are we creating with that? So it's complex, but if it were simple, somebody would be doing it already. Okay, so Ms. Medrano, you're going to bring in something back?
Yes, well, Chair, you have an asterisk from Kate in the chat.
Oh,
Hello, sorry, this is Kate from CalRecycle. I just wanted to address Commissioner Schneider's comment in the chat. She had to go and she had a question that Shelley kindly answered about, does commercial TP have recycled content? Shelley, I was hoping you could just address your answer.
Yeah. So I wasn't clear whether she was asking about toilet paper or tissue products for businesses or consumer brands. But if I understand her question correctly, that it's about commercial products that, the types of tissue products that you find in a public restroom or an airport or somewhere like that. They do tend to have more recycled content than consumer household brands. This is in part because in the 1990s, EPA established guidelines for how much recycled content should be in commercial brands for companies' procurement. And after that, not surprisingly, there was a pretty significant uptick in the amount of recycled content going into commercial brands. But there's no, similar procurement guidelines for consumer brands.
yeah, I think that would be good back down in the proposal. And yeah, we do try to avoid putting statements or comments into the chat. And Schneider left and I think left behind the comments, so that's what that was about. So. Okay, well, thank you very much.
So just wanted to circle back and finish this part of the meeting is that with the comments we received, we're developing the policy proposal. It sounds like to me that you're supportive of a proposal that will include not just toilet paper but all paper products in California. Is that the case? I didn't hear a lot of comment on that.
I think if you're willing to take that on, yeah.
Well, we could update the state agency by recycled proposal to include, just to address what the bill is now, to include this for the paper products and then do a separate policy proposal for just the recycled content part. And if they, and you've got the...
Of all products, not just personal care, so we're talking about all paper products.
Well, I guess, maybe it's two proposals. I mean, I don't know the answer because I don't know what it would look like to take on all products. In my mind, there's such a difference, like I said, between cardboard, newspaper, tissue. They all have different standards. If there's a one-size-fits-all, that's great. If it's better to go forward with a specific focus and then tackle the bigger picture, let's do that.
Okay.
Let us know. I think we're willing to take on the bigger picture.
So Manuel, maybe if you want to take the state agency by recycled one and update it for that part about the bill, and then you can do a separate one with NRDC, work with them on a proposal for the rest of it, and then bring that back to the committee, and then we can move it on to the commission. And both can be updated. So SABRAC updated and a new one for the personal care products. But I think if we go bigger than personal care products, and that's what they've done all their research on, it could get confusing and weigh it down.
Well,
I agree. I think
go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think the focus is what can we get done and really get something realistic moving in the next report. Like if you two feel like it's getting too big and it has less chance of going through, and then we lose even the toilet paper part of this, then I would really support just taking the toilet paper part because I'd really like to see the action as soon as possible. even if it's a smaller one.
Mhm.
I don't want to jeopardize that.
But I also don't want to lose the opportunity to address all other products. So perhaps Jennifer, excuse me, and Shelley, a lot of the research that the Yale students have helped you with does include other paper products as well. I understand, right? So a lot of that information might be available already.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
actually a lot of the data is just for pulp generally, and it's in some ways more of a challenge to differentiate between like the NBSK pulp and the other pulp. So to some degree, it could actually make the lift a little bit easier to include it all in one spot. But Shelley, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, I was also going to say that there are also other experts at NRDC and other groups that we're a part of that we could reach out to who have expertise on other streams as well. So, yeah.
Okay, well, let's see what comes back. We have a public comment and then Heidi Sandberg.
Yes, this is from Gail Bryce. Thanks for your good work. Do I have it correct that you're just proposing a fee on the use of virgin material to internalize cost of forest destruction and hopefully also climate impact? If it's just raising the price of toilet paper, could there be more of a stewardship program that would generate funds to help publicize the negatives of virgin material and positives of recycled material, including climate action, and expand the recycling infrastructure?
Yes, I think there's a great conversation to be had about how the funds raised from this are used, but what we were envisioning would be investment in the recycling industry in California to really grow that. You know, from our own research, we found that there's a lot of potential that's been untapped there, and would want to use those funds to help grow that.
Okay, Heidi, and then we're going to wrap up this segment. Heidi, I think you were in the chat, or just
Oh,
that early.
I thought you said Kate. I'm sorry. The only other thing I just thought of is that when the state decides to go after something, a lot of times they'll also forbid CalPERS from investing in those activities. And I'm wondering if you've considered that at all. Because to me, that's the blood that feeds the beast. If they're going to go cut the forest down and we're giving them money to do it, and then on the other side we say don't buy it, it doesn't make any sense. So I always try to make sure the state's not talking out of two sides of its mouth.
I wonder if the state could stay invested and become an advocate for these sorts of policies like you showed with the P&G.
Right, like or filing shareholder resolutions with As You Sow, for example. Maybe that's a recommendation that we could make in our policies, that the state think beyond just the one piece of it, but going to making sure we're not investing in companies, or we refuse to invest in them long term if they, if we're not going to lobby them to change these practices that we don't like.
So
That's a great
something else
point.
to consider. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we need to finish our agenda, and we have less than 15 minutes, so I'm going to call a stop at this point. But it's going to come back, and thank you both for your good work and being with us today.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. And if you do have any questions, Manuel has our email, and I can also put it in the chat as well. I really appreciate it.
Okay, and we'll put the presentation on the drive as soon as we get a copy of it.
Thank you very much. We'll be in contact.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
So I want to get back to the policy discussion that we interrupted, but we have, to do that best, I think I'm going to jump ahead in the agenda. And Kate, yeah, so with response to previous public comments, I would ask if anybody has a response to any of the comments we've received previously. If not, and those are attached, I think Kate tries to keep those updated, so we have a working copy of that, which is always good to go back and review and maybe refresh ideas. On data review and requests, do we have any update on the outstanding use, the polypropylene? question
Yeah,
from-
yes. Sorry, we do. I did not have that available for today, but that should be put on the public notice and available by, I believe, Wednesday. I will try to do it by, I'd say, Thursday or the end of the week at the latest. Sorry, we just have to format it and finalize it.
So when that's ready, it'll go on the Cal Recycle site, and we'll get
And I
an
will
update.
send it to the committee. Mhm.
Do we have any new data requests based on today's discussion? And if not, I think on the next agenda, I've scheduled a presentation from the Glass Packaging Institute around minimum content, and that's it. I'm not planning to schedule any more presentations unless I hear from you. We need to finish our policies and get them moving forward, and but we can talk about it at the next meeting. But I haven't heard of any other presentations that we'd like to arrange. But if I'm wrong, let me know. But right now, that's scheduled to be our last one. So let's go back to the policy that we were talking about, the new policy on manufacturer's role. And I think we were at the numbered section in that policy. Eric, if you want to kind of pick it up and maybe in the next 5 minutes take us through there, get any feedback, and then let's talk about whether we send this forward. I mean, I read through it. I'm not sure if the others had a chance to read through it. Okay, we have a public comment on this item.
Yes, we have, I'm sorry, and this was received at 10:30. It was from, I believe, the same person who commented anonymously. I will read the comment. The public comment system does say, please do not include any personal contact information or any other information that you wish to remain confidential. That is true. The remainder of the comment says, for the commission not to respond is outrageous. It does not matter who I am. It is my right to identify myself or not. To say my comment should not even be taken as a violation of our freedom of expression. You should be ashamed of yourself. And that has been published.
No, that's what I do.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that was our response, but
It wasn't.
Yeah.
It's what they heard.
Yeah. So yeah, John, I can build out the stakeholder group sentence a little bit more, but happy to, again, the idea here is probably a survey would get done either annually or biannually to understand the cost of recycling of different material types. The survey would also be conducted to understand what the market value or what the market is bearing for those material types. And then if there is a gap, the funding from the PRO would fill that gap. And then also if the material that is being recycled is not meeting the dates and rates performance goals, there's a gap there too that the product stewardship organization would have to fund either through continuing higher funding for the back end or in infrastructure investments, or a combination of the two.
so this seems kind of in tandem with the work coming out of the recycling committee on what's recyclable and particularly the on-ramp for materials that don't meet that standard. Is that
I mean, I think that if a material type is recyclable and there is a viable market for it that's paying for that material to pull it through the system, there's very little work for a product stewardship organization to do at that point. The investments have already been made in their material. They've made design decisions that their material is flowing through and getting recycled at a good enough rate. So what I see is something like this to come in for those other material types that are not meeting those numbers. So in that way, yes, it is. It's adjacent to the work that the recycling committee is doing.
Yeah, I'll try to get my mind around the two. And we haven't seen the written proposal from the recycling committee, so it's a bit of a position. But yeah, I've always thought when I hear about these things, there's nothing preventing, cooperative purchasing. I mean, we see it with plastics with PRCC, right? And so basically, if you don't want to fall into this category, then make sure the cost of recycling is covered. I think that's the message. Okay. Any other questions here? Any suggestions?
I'll just say that I really want to thank Eric for putting this together. I think with Sarah, was it? Did you guys work on this?
Yes.
Yeah, because this is the struggle that we've been having when we've got a system that's a lot of infrastructure already built. It's not like we're starting from scratch. How do you get producers to pay and be responsible in a way that's meaningful without necessarily giving all the control away of the system that you've spent decades building and investing in? And this is the same debate that is happening all across the country. So this proposal to me seems to take the best of the worlds. It takes, what was already built and working, it leaves alone what is, and make sure it's able to function. And then what isn't working is tagged to be fixed. And the producers have to play in that and have to help pay for the markets that don't exist when we're trying to push stuff out that has no place to go. So I really applaud you for trying to put this pen to paper. And I personally think we ought to just, move it on to the commission to start a discussion about this, because I think this will be a healthy discussion and it won't be a one and done. So we might as well just start that discussion and debate and get public feedback for the whole commission to hear it. That would be my thinking.
All right. Anybody have contrary thoughts? All right. So we're 4 for 4. I would suggest, I don't know, Heidi Sanborn, since you chair the commission, how do, maybe we're going to have the only ones on the next meeting. But, well, can they go on the next meeting? The agenda's already
Yes.
published.
Yes.
So they can, okay, they can go on.
We publish the agendas so that any proposal coming out of any committee could be heard and moved on the way it's written.
Okay. So then I think the authors, we're going to need to resolve the formatting issue about, the outside contributors and how that gets done at the committee level, and maybe we can come up with an approach, since we're going to be the first ones doing that. And then I would suggest that the authors get in touch with each other, work on the changes, but also decide who's going to make the presentation and try to own the presentation so it's, on point.
Yeah.
And we don't spend a lot of time just turning pages. But otherwise, yeah, let's go. Okay, so we're going to hear about glass next time. I'm awaiting a textile proposal that is going to, I think, be on a more narrow focus than the presentation we had, but I haven't received it yet. And then we'll see if we have a proposal or proposals from today. And it sounds like Ann Schneider said she's working on the usable food packaging. So I think we ticked off everything on the list at this point. There were a couple of broader topics on C&D. I think we've decided on flooring and carpet. We're not going to revisit that issue. And we're going to, at some point, we need to talk about certification of recycling rates, which was on the list. I don't know if that goes in the background, committee background report. So maybe we can clarify that next time, if no one's working on any specific language around that. So, okay, well, we're 3 minutes early.
John, did we want to talk about the PRC that we put in the Google Doc just real quickly?
Yeah, go ahead, Heidi, why don't you?
Okay. Well, I got this on Friday from our friends over at the Northeast Recycling Council. And they'd actually submitted a letter to Cal Recycle with this attachment. It's called Let's Get Started, Government Recycling Demand Champion. And they're asking that Cal Recycle sign up to be a government recycling demand champion. So this gets to this whole market development stuff. Every single state is struggling with this. But I was impressed that they have a commitment letter to sign, purchasing a PCR containing items. I would note they've got nothing in here about paper, which is what we just talked about. But they have pretty much other major items. And then they're going to be reporting what's been purchased and ask that those things be reported and that states really work together to drive markets. And I just thought this was really interesting for us to know about, and it'd be interesting to see what Cal Recycle does with it. But it was nice to see that states are trying to coordinate together to figure out how they can drive markets with their purchasing behavior.
I was curious about the certification or verification of the claims. Do you know?
Well, I'm actually, yeah, I'm speaking at their conference on the 30th, but this is a major thing that we've had a previous discussion in the fall with them is the need to have national recycled content verifiers and standards. This will continue to be an issue because each state can't do it alone. It's too expensive.
Maybe you could see if they have thoughts around that on this
I'll ask.
proposal, and we can report it back at the next meeting. So, okay, well, we're going to get kicked off.
Chair Davis, I actually have one public comment. I think I can make it. So it's from Gail Bryce. Sorry, I'm commenting on this late, but it would be extremely helpful if the drywall diversion from demolition into a C&D policy separate from the current scrap drywall diversion policy from construction. This way, all the primary materials generated from demolition could be handled as a related issue. For example, a primary reason minimal commercial carpet is recycled from demolition projects is due to the contamination of the carpet by the drywall removal. This could also help with the future recycling of flooring. Interior removal specialist in Southern California has an excellent source separation demolition program that generates drywall, clean carpet, and other materials for recycling. Richard Lutt, their environmental affairs director, has ideas how their program could be expanded statewide through changing the C&D regulations and ordinances. He's interested in addressing the committee, or we could write a draft proposal policy if of interest. Thank you. I will make sure that's posted and send it to you.
All right, so you can consider that as appropriate.
Yeah.
In the rewrite.
Okay.
Okay, great. We're done.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Great job.
Bye.
Go ahead.